Hello and welcome to another Pantocrator podcast. This time we are going to speak to one of the better known investors in this space, which is ETF Partners. Many of you know that they've been in business for now coming up to 20 years. They're on their fourth fund and have 750 million under management. So it's my thrill to introduce Patrick Sheehan, a founder, and also Robert Genieser, managing partner. So welcome, Patrick and Bob.
Nice to be with you, Andre.
Yeah. No, I think there's so much to cover, and this is a big year for you, where you're going to celebrate your 20th anniversary, and I'm sure there's so many of our listeners are going to want to kind of pick your brains about kind of what you've learned along the way. But I thought it'd be great to kind of start out, the concept of this, and maybe over to you, Patrick, about kind of what prompted you, back in 2004, 2005 to take this journey.
Yeah, I'm happy to speak to that. It was 2005. I'd recently come back from California, where I'd spent several years setting up a venture business for 3i.
Right.
Where I'd worked for many, many years.
Yeah.
So I'd done venture for ages, and California was kind of like the Premier League.
Yeah.
But we were coming back here because our kids were growing up, and it was a real life decision, and it made both of us think quite deeply about what we wanted. We got to realizing it would be quite embarrassing as believers in climate change to have done nothing about it. And it gradually occurred to me that we could use venture capital to fund the innovations that could help address climate change. That wasn't really a thing.
Yeah.
And but it seemed, having had that thought, it was quite difficult to walk away from it. And so, to cut a long story short, we founded the Environmental Technologies Fund, or ETF, which was a kind of a first of a kind clean tech or climate tech fund. The words were not around.
Yeah, that's right.
It felt, politely you might say brave or many other words, but it really felt like something worthwhile and worth doing. And so we put it to some investors that funds should exist and we should create a seasoned team to do it, because the need for innovation would create a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, there were very few other players in Europe even thinking along those lines. I mean, today it's obviously very, very different. So just kind of what going through that period of time, just to very briefly kind of describe kind of some of the big points that jump out at you when you look back at it now, kind of, because it's been not a flat road, right? It's been one with lots of turns in it.
Yeah, well, maybe you should start at the beginning. One of the things that occurred to me was, if you're starting a business, you need a good partner, and you want to look the part. And so we got fancy premises in Berkeley Square at a massively reduced rent, and we got my colleague Rob as a partner. And
yeah,
a number of birds with one stone, and by renting an office from him for next to nothing, and having a fancy address and a bigger team, and so we had credibility out the gate, right, which is always key. But at that stage, we were selling a concept, and we were explaining to people there was no conflict between purpose and profit, right? In fact, the need was the opportunity. And now I think that we're in an entirely different world where people see the market pull around climate, whereas back then there was technology push to try and solve things.
I'll jump in here because you might say, why did I give him a desk at the back of our office back then, when he had this really clever idea that hopefully was going to do something very positive for the world? And it starts with people. Patrick and I had known each other in Silicon Valley when he was there. I had tremendous respect for what he was doing in the tech world. And when he went back to Europe and had this great idea to start ETF, I said, I really should get involved with that. And so hence we supported him in those early days. And that was part of our mission, because at the time I was one of the managing partners at Vertex that was part of Temasek.
Okay.
What we tried to do was spot innovation, next generation ideas, what was coming over the horizon. And, Patrick starting up one of the first sustainable investment funds for Europe was a pretty neat thing. If you have a purpose in life, you should follow that purpose. And so, what I really wanted to do was try to give something back. And it was my belief that you could use technology also as a force for good and start to solve some of the big environmental problems of the day. And the work that Patrick had been doing was excellent. And I said, let's go. Let's see what we can do here.
But you're so right. It's that happy sort of circumstance of the right people finding each other at the right time, and then also having the staying power to do it, because it's been a long road. And I guess it's had its ups and downs, and I just wondered, kind of what have you, aside from, well, I guess building the team is critical, but what are the other lessons that you've kind of learned along the way that I think some companies or even other funds would find useful?
Well, there's so many. I'll start off with one particular one, which is the need for resilience, right? So we probably started a decade earlier than we should have done, right? And that decade takes a bit of resilience, and so I think it's given us a little bit of extra empathy with the entrepreneurs we're backing, and I think actually it's become very valuable to us because people can appreciate the values we have stood for through thick and thin, and often people want to deal with us because of those values now. So it was hard work, but it's paying off now. And so having a sense of purpose and mission is just really good business for us.
Because you are entrepreneurs in your own right, right? And you have that for a similar, where you're able to, that point of empathy, I think, is one that's not actually talked about enough in our view. It's really putting yourself in their shoes. And setting up your own fund is one way to do it.
And the other thing I'd highlight, by the way, is or put it this way, I often say that we don't try to compete by being smarter than everybody else. Hopefully we're not too stupid, but everybody in venture capital is smart, right?
Yeah.
But we can compete on values and on culture. So we put a lot of effort on getting the right values and the right culture. And I think that really works in business, right? It's a simplification of management, and it really helps. It helps recruiting talent. It helps working with entrepreneurs, and it makes business simpler and better.
Andre, I want to jump in because the best thing about being a partner with Patrick is we like to debate things. We don't always have it from the same point of view. And Patrick used the words that maybe we were 10 years too early. You could argue we were 10 years too late. And what am I saying when I say that? Well, the climate emergency is real today. People really needed to get started tackling the problems. People really needed to start driving innovation. When Patrick makes that point that we might have been 10 years too early, we have to deliver financial returns. We have to deliver impact. And on those early days, that was difficult to do.
Yeah.
There's also a learning curve to go up. We were successful, hopefully experienced, hopefully, good tech investors. But to apply that knowledge in our world, that was slightly different, right? And so I think we've learned a lot along the way. And I'm glad we started the journey when we did. I think at the time, a lot of my friends in the general tech community thought we were on the fringes of respectability. That's what I like to say.
Yeah, that's a nice one.
What were we doing out there on the edge trying to make a difference? And it's amazing how the world has come to us saying the technologies that we back, the entrepreneurs that we back are really, really important today. And you can have both impact and success.
Yeah. And it's interesting because it's not when you talk about values as well, we're not in a short race. I mean, this is a long, process. And, values actually help you stand the test of time, right? And one of the things we've noticed is that, a lot of the tech is there. And what the challenge of capital is to actually allow that to scale, right? And some of the challenges have really been about how to break down some of those walls. And it does take time. And, I just wonder what, when you say, okay, we're at an early stage or mid or kind of late or ABC rounds, where do you see today kind of where ETF is adding or seeing where the most help is needed?
Probably you might want to answer as well, because clearly we'll say something different from what you just said. But I would say we're at our best when companies are up and running, they've got commercial customers, CEO, he or she is beginning to feel pretty good about life and is really thinking about scaling. And that's where we can make the biggest difference and be the most helpful. And so that's where we focus. And what we've noticed over the years is we see more and more good quality entrepreneurs and more good quality opportunities that are in that sweet spot. And by the way, there's not so much money around at that point in time. So I think we're doing something really useful there, with the first 5 million or 10 million that's really scaling the business and changing it.
And Andre, just to add a point there, again, Patrick encouraged me to say something slightly different, so I will. I do believe actually getting on with the entrepreneur, empathizing with the entrepreneur. That's the one thing that we've learned over the years is really, really important. We're looking for the people that not just have the ability to grow a great business, but are interested in sort of the mission of doing something positive on the environmental challenges. And as Patrick was saying, we're seeing more and more people interested in that. We're seeing more and more people with better skill sets coming to that. And so I think when we look at the companies, I always start with the people first, because great people can take average technology and have success. If you've got lousy people and great technology, you're going to have some problems on their boards.
Yeah, that is so true.
One area I think we both agree is, I started out as a technologist, and I still find technology really fascinating. But the deep joy comes from being helpful to entrepreneurs, and that sounds a bit corny, but it's just the people are so interesting, and helping people on their journey is just kind of great, right? This has become my hobby, I say, and that makes it sound amateurish, but it's just a passion, right?
Well, it's a brilliant job to be able to, meet people, dozens of them every week with, that are coming up with something new. I mean, you're in this flow of technology and new ideas. Admittedly, a lot of them don't stick. But, I think it's an ideal place to be. And the breadth of technology is just getting bigger and bigger. But one thing of note, we've seen from our side, I'd be interested kind of your take on it, is you can see a company that's got a really interesting tech and it's been sort of trying to get into certain customer segments for a long time. New management come in, all of a sudden they say, you know what, we actually should be going and addressing a different industry. Bam, it takes off. So it's not so much the tech, it's really the application or the vision that a CEO can bring, can change things 100%. I think it goes back to Rob's point about its management and then tech.
And it's sort of both, I would argue, but it's the small iterations that ultimately make something click, right? And by the way, we focus most of our efforts on digital companies, and we would say we invest in the intelligence layer that enables modern infrastructure as a way of trying to capture what we do within sustainability and impact. And the reason we focus there is we know better how to scale those digitally based companies, and by scaling them fast, we can have impact fast, right? So we're trying to see really positive impact within the lifetime of the funds we raise, right? We, like every other venture firm, raises 10-year fixed life funds, so we want impact in that time frame, not in a time frame of nuclear fusion, which is whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And so we're focusing on really big impact really quickly, typically through digital technologies.
And we think that that's an enduring proposition, because as networks and platforms and infrastructures build out, whether it was solar, it's batteries or car charging, you name it, it's going to require more and more intelligence. And I think, funds like yourselves are able to take those companies that I think will continue to scale because they've got more to scale too. You have still more solar being built every year, more storage being built every year, more, the grid has its issues. And I think it's a good place to be from, I guess, over the foreseeable future, let's hope.
Yeah, and we say to our entrepreneurs that they have to focus, and we have to focus too. So this is our sweet spot, basically.
Yeah.
Andre, just to maybe add another point, it's easier to do that once you have infrastructure already rolled out. So, when you have a bunch of electric cars on the road, a bunch of chargers on the road, it's a lot easier to think about what sort of intelligent software you're going to put on top of that. And so what we're seeing is existing infrastructure, the opportunity to upgrade that through the use of data, algorithms, AI, if you will, all the way through to, okay, what's the infrastructure that's coming next? As that deploys, what sort of solutions, digital solutions do you need around that? And that's a really interesting spot to be, I think.
Yeah. But what it does mean is that the first bits of infrastructure have to be dumb. Right? Someone has to be out there building these kind of, dumb car chargers or just solar panels, right? And then you have that small amount of critical mass that allows software to run on it. But I think it's something that as you get deeper into it, there's more and more to do. I mean, we're spending a lot of time on the grid, and the trying to balance the grid, and it's so many different players that come into it, um, and that's a challenge. I mean, it's not going to be solved in a couple of years, right? There's many years of enhancements that can come with it. So, and it is a deep market, but where you're less likely to have one company that can do 10 different functions, you're probably going to have 10 different companies that need to work together to actually provide solutions. Maybe we do consolidate into the future, but that's kind of what we're seeing at this point.
Well, I think we're still at the fairly early stages of seeing, if I won't use techie words, but the practical application of intelligence in the real world, right?
Yeah.
This is just beginning, and so this is a very deep pool to fish in.
Yeah, and I just had, you painted a very nice picture there about different types of companies coming together to provide solutions. I think there's also easier fruit to grab from the tree. And what does that mean? That means we invested in an AI company that's optimizing the routing of ships. Okay, I don't need any new hardware from that. I don't need any other companies involved. Ships sail on the seas. I can take the existing infrastructure, put my, if you would, software algorithms data on top, and I can show them how to do that in a much more efficient manner and cut fuel consumption by 10 to 15%. Right?
Yeah.
So you have areas where you have to bring lots of pieces together, but there are also some very, again, low-hanging fruit that you can go and do and have tremendous impact, with just thinking through what's already there.
Yeah, I mean, that I guess is kind of a great example of sustainability through innovation, right?
Sorry, Andre, if you look at the scale of impact there, shipping accounts for 3 or 4% of global warming. There's lots of studies to say it's going to take you 90 billion just to change the ports to get new types of fuels, and it's going to take 10 or 20 years to start to do this, so it's really hard to abate. And people would say to us, you should do this hard to abate stuff, right? But with the backing a software company with a few million, we could very, very rapidly shave 10% off of that. So 0.3 or 0.4% of global warming very fast.
Yeah, it's why do the hard to abate when you can do the easy to abate,
Ultimately, we need to do everything, but not doing the easy stuff really soon is not smart.
It's silly. We see sectors right now. I mean, one is heat storage, which we're, spending a lot of time on. I mean, the amount, that's 20% of, energy, right? And that's a biggie. Everyone's going after sustainable aviation fuel because you can define it, right? But we have other sectors that are really not exploited as much as I think they will be.
Exactly.
So there's a lot to do there. But I'm just thinking in terms of, we've talked about AI a little bit, and what we've heard from folks that we've spoken to, it's got a kind of double-edged sword. One, it's going to soak up all the world's energy, right? The other one is actually, if you use it intelligently, you could do a lot more with less. I mean, when you talk about the intelligent layer, which we totally agree. But what are your thoughts around kind of how that presents opportunities for you? Because I know you have done a fair number of investments in that sector.
We have, and they have, the ones we like have had common characteristics of, it's been about the practical application in a real world setting of AI to drive efficiency rather than large language models and things like that. And I think if I was to generalize, typically in complex environments, and whether it's shipping or mixing cement or house building or many things, there's too many variables for people to truly optimize. So there's a low-hanging fruit of 10% saving you can get with AI, right? If I generalize, and that's actually a heck of a lot. If you can figure out, not so much these days the technology, but if you can speak the language of the sector you're talking to, and so that's really attractive for us.
Yeah, and Andre, again, it's sort of fun to speak through example. So I've just joined a board of a company called Nodes and Links, which is in the large project management software space. Right? And so think about people spending hundreds of millions, if not billions, building out a new rail line to the north or a new fab in the desert, what have you. People are constantly changing those projects, as we know.
Yeah.
the added cost associated with doing that, the complexity that comes from a change, the time that comes from that, the need to report back to the insurance companies that provide the insurance for those types of projects. Somebody's got to manage that in a clever way. And why not go ask AI what the suggestion should be? What's the way to optimize things? And that's where you get to do some really clever things, to Patrick's point, on very specific point issues. And hopefully, in so doing, you save a lot of time and a lot of money.
Yeah. From the other side of it opens up the kind of need for environmental systems. You see, just like in data centers, if you look at it, the other side of this, it's going to need a lot more energy. We see that what I guess a Chat GPT query uses about 10 times as much energy as a Google search, and so if you get 10% of searches are Chat GPT, well, you got twice as much energy you need to use, right?
Yeah, and that, so clearly that there is a cost to this boom, and if we're just using it mindlessly, it's not such good news. But there are a lot of benefits to the practical application of these things, and indeed we've been looking at companies that just make the cloud more efficient. So we have one in Italy we invested in called Cubit, which is a sort of software controlled cloud, if you will, which actually drives a huge amount of efficiency, and coincidentally gives you sovereignty over your data, which is also a hot topic. And you can probably increase the efficiency of cloud storage by somewhere between 25 and 45% with this type of approach. So yeah, the use of data is growing, but the efficiency with which it's handled can also grow.
Yeah. It's interesting you make that point. We were involved in a situation where it was about cooling in data centers, and
Right.
50% of the energy in a data center is cooling. And if you could be more efficient at cooling, you could use more of that energy for data processing, right?
And again, Andre, I can't resist going back to the history of the Environmental Technologies Fund. When Patrick set this up, it was before the iPhone. And I remember when the iPhone came out, everybody was aghast because who's going to store all these videos and think about that and what's going to happen with bandwidth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The fact of the matter is technology is going to march on, right? And we better make the best of it and do the best we can with it as opposed to bemoan it. And so, I think it's very important to put those data centers in places where you can go get renewable power. Governments have a role to play in sort of encouraging that, mandating that. But at the end of the day, technology will continue to walk forward, and we should try to use it in the best way we can.
We see big opportunities in the grid and the low voltage grid, right? Some studies have shown that the capacity utilization, average capacity utilization, is 10% at best. I mean, talk about, when you mentioned on shipping, using AI to kind of cut down 15%. I mean, if you use it with the same grid, you could actually double the traffic through it without having to build a whole new grid. But it's the intelligence layer. So I think I agree with, I think Patrick, you were saying earlier, we're kind of still at the early stages.
Yeah, and we see a lot of opportunity is the long and short of it, right? And Europe, it feels like a great place to be for what we're doing, honestly. We've said this for years, and it's even more true today, to keep it simple, right?
Yeah. In Europe, it's we see from companies that we talk to, they always kind of complain about valuations in Europe versus California, and but there is a lot of innovation, and I think the level of it today versus what we had like 10 or 15 years ago it's a huge difference, right? It's completely different. The mindset of people is very different.
Well, I think we've seen every few years a noticeable improvement in the environment across Europe. So the only thing I would complain about is the fact that people complain. I was at a conference on venture capital in Italy where there's a small but booming venture sector. At this conference, everyone was saying, we're not as good as such and such. So in the end, I said to someone, can everyone just kind of stop complaining? Because this is a fantastic environment. You're next to this university with a genuine supercomputer. You've got these huge brands around you. Think of the opportunity, not the complaints. And that way, there's kind of an abundance, actually, even in some of the newer parts of Europe, shall we say.
Yeah, I mean, Rob, I know you're familiar with Greece. I mean, as am I. And I've seen, 15, 20 years ago, kids would study economics and get a desk job. And you had the big crisis where, a lot of Greeks left. A lot of them are coming back right now, setting up startups. They've got some great funds. There's a whole kind of ecosystem that didn't exist, 10 years ago, right?
Well, and I don't think people look under the covers, if that analogy works today. And what I mean by that is that AI company that's optimizing the routing of ships, it's a
Yeah.
Greek company,
Yeah.
right? And the other thing to point out is if you look at the statistics for Europe, what percentage of graduates that have studied AI are Greek? It's a disproportionate large sum of the total, right? Percentage of the total. And so, again, if you really work hard to get, if you would, around Europe and see some places of excellence, you'll find lots of great ideas.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that, and that kind of creates a groundswell, right? Because it creates an ecosystem and it gets its own sort of, I guess, critical mass, right? But yeah, no, we expect that because historically, you ask most folks where they're investing, it's kind of Northern Europe, it's Germany, it's UK, it's Scandinavia. Now people are like, hey, I've got a Spanish deal, I've got a Greek deal, I've got an Italian, which I guess 7 or 8 years ago would have been a bit more of the exception rather than,
Yeah, we see it ourselves, right? That clearly, our core markets are the UK, Germany, France, and the Nordics, and
yeah.
now we're talking about Greece and Italy and Portugal and Spain, and of course, everybody there is every bit as smart and well educated, and there's probably more talent at better prices there, right? So they actually have quite an advantage.
Well, yeah, you've got the quality of life. You've got people wanting to go home and have a better quality of life. But also, you've got, I guess, just the economics. Energy in those countries is hugely expensive. I think Italy, it's still very expensive, isn't it? So you've got a lot of room that you can move downward, right, in providing cheaper energy.
Yeah, so I think we'll continue to see more exciting companies coming from more diverse geographies across Europe, in short, and that's a great thing. We should encourage it.
So aside from that, I mean, what other sort of themes do you think, if you look, I know it's hard to, the world's changing so much, right? We still don't know where we are on trade, right? But where, if you were to look forward into the next, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, what are kind of the areas, I know you're deep in digital and with AI, but if there's anything other than that you would add kind of as focus areas that you think, deserve attention from your side?
There's a number. As you say, our main focus is digital, which is a fairly broad canvas of itself,
Yeah.
and AI is part of that. We've been looking more and more into the satellite industry, where we've seen, because costs of building and running satellites are just plunging, because Europe is a walled garden. Actually, there's great opportunities in Europe and great potential positive environmental impact as well, by the way. We So we've been looking at a whole bunch of trends where what you might have thought of as deep tech is becoming commercial, including quantum computing as well, right? Where we see, with the commercialization of quantum, potentially very profound positive impact. And so actually there's a number of trends now beginning to mature, which I think will make the next 10 years quite exciting.
And Patrick, I'm going to answer the question from a different angle, which is, you quite rightly focused on some of the areas, the sectors we're interested in. I'm going to address it from an environmental impact angle, which is a lot of the investments we've been making have been on the mitigation side. And so we're trying to figure out ways, if you would, to stop environmental degradation, excessive carbon in the atmosphere, et cetera, et cetera. But now there's more and more focus on adaptation because we live in a world that has heated up. It's not will it heat up, it has heated up. And as a result, there are going to be profound consequences on both the European populace, but on a global scale. And we need to start looking at solutions on that front as well. And so we made our first investor in Central and Southern Europe's leading digital insurer, which is all about providing coverage for people that don't have it as the floods rage, as the fires come. And obviously, it's not just about adaptation with insurance, but you can also do mitigation as well.
Yeah.
You can take the the worst polluting cars off the road that you recognize from an insurance point of view, as an example, right? And so I think, if you look at our fund 5, 6, 7, we'll be thinking a lot more about adaptation because we live in a very different world today. We'll continue to look different tomorrow.
That's really interesting, Rob, because, even if we're highly successful at accelerating the deployment of all the technologies that we've got, we've already got this momentum in climate change happening as we speak, right? So even if we were to stop it, it will continue on its own. And, I guess you see places in Florida or the Mediterranean or wherever, whether it's fires or floods, as you mentioned, that's a big area. So lots to really think about, going forward. So that, one of the other analogy we've seen is that when people look at solar, they think kind of we're done, because you look at these graphs where you see we started like 2008, how many panels, and then now we've got just shooting up. We're doing, I don't know, about 600-700 gigawatts this year, where I remember when I got in this business, a gigawatt was a big number. But the reality is we need to be 3 times bigger in 4 years in solar than where we are now. So we're actually still, if not mid-journey, maybe still early part of the journey,
I think
right?
we're still early, but we're past the tipping point, right, where solar is now in many places the cheapest form of energy. That will simply serve to accelerate it, right? And that in turn will mean it's inevitable that the local grids are re-architected and changed, and the control systems and intelligence applied to do that isn't here today, and there'll be whole new industries there, and the way we think about energy will change. I mean, in some ways, if you deploy solar, you shouldn't price your energy relative to gas. That makes no sense, right? It's an infrastructure cost, and so it should just be a fixed price relative to your capital cost. And so the way you even think about it changes, right? And so we're at the very beginnings of, I think, quite deep change in that entire energy system.
Yeah, and that's the thing we're constantly trying to remind ourselves, maybe it's myself, but we are, even though we've done a lot in the last 10, 15, 20 years, we're still at the early part of a journey, which means there's so much more to do, and you can attract that much more talent and an investment. So I think, Rob, you hinted at Fund 6, 7, 8.
Yeah, that's not meant to be a forward-looking statement, so we'll see. But Andre, I love what you're saying about solar, right? It's still early innings, and what's he talking about? The cost of an electron from solar panels so cheap today. Where do we need to go? Well, the reality, of course, is the sun shines during the day and not the night, and usage is at night. So that obviously brings on the need for batteries, right? And then that brings on the need for software to do clever things around the charging and discharging of batteries. Here's a helpful hint for your listeners. Stay tuned. That will probably be our next investment, right? And so, the bottom line on this is we're still very much in early innings on a lot of technologies, even though they make great economic sense, are rolling out globally. And just to make a sort of a chippy little comment, it's very hard for politicians to stop good economics.
Yeah. No, that's so true, Rob. And, and it's sort of self-sustaining because as you build out storage, because the economics of it improve when that storage can be hooked up to an intelligent network that allows it to trade that stored energy with other takers, and that means you've got trading companies, you've got marketplaces, you've got aggregators, so I think it's, someone started out with a very simple solar farm. He's ending up being a energy aggregator. It makes your life a lot more exciting.
Yeah. And as we've seen with other industries, most notably in computing, at a certain point in this evolution, the value moves from the hardware to the software, and from the software then to the applications. And so there's a journey which we should expect in and around the world of energy, right?
And it's that software that will add the extra value to that hardware and make it that much more financeable by a broader pool of capital, or at least we hope. Right,
exactly.
Well, there's lots to do. And if only we were 20 years younger, It's just, I think I should have started this like 20 years ago rather than 15 years ago. But anyway.
But we've been doing this 20 years, and we feel like we're just starting.
And that's the bit, we just have to figure out how to stay young for another 30 years.
I think my children would wish I would grow up, Andre. So it's all relative. Perspective.
That's brilliant. Well, listen, thank you both. I mean, it's always a treat to speak to you guys, and even more so to share this with a broader group.
And Andre, I just want to say you were also there at the beginning, and we very much appreciate your support over the years as well. So it's been fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's been a terrific voyage, and I think it's it's about people, and we do this because we enjoy working with the people. So it's an honor to kind of be in this industry, So, well, thank you both.
Thank you.
Nice to see you.
Great. Likewise. Thank you.